Okay, it's showtime. I promised you guys that you would get a broad cross-section of speakers and perspectives about entrepreneurship. We're starting off at the top of the charts. Today's speaker is literally a global leader who has hit every button that defines or characterizes an entrepreneur. He characterizes himself as a continuous learner, a mentor, and an entrepreneur. Mohan Reddy is a visionary who has placed India on the global map for leading-edge engineering research and development services. He holds postgraduate degrees in mechanical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology and an industrial and operations engineering degree from the University of Michigan. This is the first time he's been back to Michigan in 10 years. I'm thrilled to get him for us today. He's very passionate about entrepreneurship, and he's also passionate about helping startups, funding new companies, mentoring and growing businesses in India and around the world. His own company has grown to over $400 million in revenue. He's a leading force that is truly considered a key influencer, sought out not only by other industries, but by governments to help them think about how they address their own needs for infrastructure, R&D, technology services. Please give a warm and enthusiastic welcome to today's speaker, Mohan Reddy.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much, Frank, for the introduction. I'd like to introduce myself in very simple terms that I'm an entrepreneur. I spent 40 years of my life as an entrepreneur. Several people call me a business leader, but I still call myself as an entrepreneur because entrepreneurs are the people who constantly look for change. They constantly drive change. And I am a change agent. It's been 40 years since I graduated from the school. I graduated from University of Michigan. So I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, wouldn't have been born when I graduated. So can somebody lift his hand or her hand if he or she was born before 1976? Look at my audience, just 1, 2, 3 of them. So amazing are the times. So therefore, 40 years back, I went to school. And I tried to do a little bit of surfing around to find the course which actually, the course I took, it was called Policy Control 615. It doesn't exist any longer, I'm told. The course description was Small Business Management. And that was the course, I think, primarily laid the foundation in me in terms of becoming an entrepreneur. But I didn't become an entrepreneur as soon as I left the school. I belonged to a generation where people felt that experience was equally important as much as your ideas. So I decided to become a professional, work for somebody for 15 years. But I used to work in any company that I did, for about 3 companies I did thereafter, all the time thinking that it was my company. So finally, wisdom dawned on me, saying that, why don't you have your own company as opposed to work for somebody else? So even 15 years later, my foundations were strong. My passion was very high. I decided to become an entrepreneur. That was 1991. 1991, I started the company in India. I'm still headquartered out of India. I'm a global company. There was a major challenge in India in terms of foreign exchange. The first time that Indian government was getting into challenges in terms of not paying for their debt. And that's when the then government embarked on a strategy of globalization. I saw the winds of change, and I decided to be a part of that wind. And that wind took me to be where I am today. In these 24 years, constantly we worked in making sure we had the right service offering, the right strategy, we'll spend more amount of time. But fast forward, what transpired is that from a very small beginning of 2 engineers who were primarily working out of my modest home on my dining table, we now have about 15,000 of them. From no revenues, this year, our current run rate says that we will be a $500 million company. From a company where we started off with $100,000 of personal money, we have a market cap which is in excess of $1 billion today. So this is how the journey was in the last 24 years. I'll still call myself an entrepreneur. What do we do to get where we are at this point of time? It's primarily my company provides design and engineering services to large manufacturing companies all around the world. Primarily large manufacturing companies around the world, large engineering manufacturing companies around the world have challenges in terms of capacity, in terms of capability, in terms of skills. And as a result, they all found that is one way of doing that is also go to other parts of the world. And that is the service that I provide to these large companies. I also get involved in terms of data transformation, network operations, also as a second service offering from the company. If I were to further simplify it to get to relate to all of you, I work with companies like Boeing to design the aircraft fuselage or the interiors. I work for a company like Pratt & Whitney to design their aircraft engines, or for Bombardier doing the signaling and interlocking systems for London Underground, or with Westinghouse for the nuclear power plant business. On the network transformation work, we work with companies like AT&T, British Telecom, and so on and so forth, or with Southern California Edison. So primarily, it is a services play that we have with the company, and I'll come to tell you how I transformed myself over a period of last 24 years. So that's by way of introduction to what I do. Primarily in design engineering services company catering to customers all around the globe. To give you another data point, 98% of our business is done outside India. 15% of our workforce is outside India. And I believe from those 2 engineers that we had who primarily were from India, today we have about 24 different nationalities of people who work in the company in 36 locations around the world. That's what we are. So what I'm going to do is spend next half hour or so in terms of trying to tell you the lessons I learned in the last 20 plus years of my journey. The first lesson I have, I'm sorry, I should have probably done this a little earlier, is I always keep telling people dream big. If you want to truly become an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, you need to have the vision, and a vision coupled with strategy becomes a reality, which otherwise will remain a dream by itself. So therefore, one of the things that we've always seen with entrepreneurs to become successful is you need to dream. They're dream merchants is what I keep calling them. But they just do not remain as dreams. They have to definitely get backed with proper execution to ensure that they become reality. There's always this debate, can entrepreneurship be taught? Yes, certain elements of entrepreneurship can be taught. I can teach you how to make a business plan. I can always teach you how to make a market research. How can I tell you about more amount of how operational excellence can be built in an organization? But I can't teach you about passion. I can't teach you about your commitment. Entrepreneurs who are paranoid to be successful are the people who have become successful. So any of these adjectives that I used, passion, paranoid, commitment, these cannot be taught. So it has to come from within people. We can only create an ecosystem which will help you in terms of thinking to become entrepreneurs. And this is one of them. You hear a successful entrepreneur, a success story, you get motivated, your passion levels would come up. So therefore, entrepreneurs, to become successful, need to have passion. And also what I have done is that I've took a road which is much less traveled. Typically, when we look at Indian software industry, most of the companies specialize in IT services. Now, may not be familiar, but this industry from India is about $148 billion strong. That's the size of Indian IT industry, dominated by exports to every country in the world. That's what this industry does. I do have a role in that part of the story. I also happen to be the chairman of the industry body, which has got membership of all the companies. But more importantly, these companies, while most of them were in IT services in the initial days, people like us took a road which was less traveled. And the road was getting into engineering R&D services, as opposed to getting into a mode which was the traditional IT services. So entrepreneurs also think in terms of having something different from what has been done in the past. You cannot have business as usual. You always need to move into areas which are different from what has been done in the past. We rode on a wave, which I keep calling it as the broadband innovation. Till 1990s, broadband was not available in plenty as what it is available today. Look at the advancements that have happened further in broadbanding too. 2G, 3G, 4G, and people in some of the university, good friends of mine, without naming who they are, they're talking about a 5G, which will now do about 20 megabits per second transfer rates. So it was broadbanding which enabled companies in the United States or in Europe and so on and so forth to use resources back in India in terms of getting their work performed. And that's an opportunity that we saw. We saw a dream of building a large engineering services company. We also saw a disruption where there was a need for people to find work back in India. But honestly, when we talked about engineering services, the path was not very easy. People had challenges in terms of how intellectual property is protected in countries like India. Whether they have enough of laws to do that. There were laws, but there were no case laws to say that it was really protected. So therefore, we had to find, when we found that engineering was not moving as per our plan, entrepreneurs always look for adjacencies. I'm not saying dramatically different. And we found an adjacency which was close to engineering and which had a fairly large opportunity. If you look at the very low end of the engineering food chain, the service that one could offer is digitization of drawings. You have paper drawings that were there, they could be digitized and put into a digital format into a computer. Whereas you get to the next stage of the similar thing in GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, you convert paper drawings into a digital format. This is not something which can be done automated because there's a sizable amount of intelligence that's required in making these intelligent digital databases. So we went ahead and designed processes which could ensure we could get 99% accuracy consistently over and over again. And we put processes in place to make sure that this could be scaled. At one stage, we had 2,000 to 3,000 digitizers who would take paper maps and convert them into a digital format. Digital format at a 99% accuracy. So you have a cost, you have a quality, and you have an on-time delivery. Those were the three critical parameters for making a services company successful. So therefore, while I certainly wanted to build an engineering company, I never lost sight of it. I continue to keep the focus on it. So the first lesson that I learned in my life was that entrepreneurship starts with a vision, but the path of achieving this vision could rarely be a straight line. You could always have bumps on the road. You might have to take a little bit of deviations here and there. But ultimately, you should not lose focus on what you want to achieve in making sure that you're successful with the dream that you have. Let me move to my second story. This is one story which rings all the time in my ears. This is one story that I heard so constantly when I took this course on small business management. And that is, you need to be distinctively different from others. You can't, if you're saying, I'm going to do the same thing like somebody else does, to me, that's not entrepreneurship. That's certainly not a case for success. One of my venture capitalist fund, one of my venture capital friends told me of the recent past that if he heard the story in the past in some form, some shape, in some language, he would never fund them. I think that's a very great way in terms of trying to understand that if you want to put a business in place, you have to be different from others who are there in the marketplace. Only then you would be successful. You look at the first service offering that we had, or first set of service offerings we had, we call it as Cyient 1.0. In 1.0, our service offerings were digitization services. It may sound very simple, but ability to say that we could do 99% accuracy, ability to say we can scale to 3,000 people. We have processes in place which will ensure that there is on-time delivery, makes that service offering distinctly different. You constantly then work on innovation in making sure that you improve the process, you improve the business model to ensure that you could have your distinctively different identity is not lost out. When we turn to Cyient 2.0, where in 2000, by a freak accident, we met a potential customer called Pratt & Whitney. That is where our engineering services story started off. And we did not have much of engineering capability by that time. But the customer liked us for one thing, I believe. And he saw the process compliance we had in our digitization services. And he said, look, you guys can get the domain expertise. You could certainly, if you have the same compliance in terms of process, you could also do aircraft engine design. And there was no looking back for the story. On a single engagement for aircraft engine design, we now have 1,600 engineers. That is how the service offering was to provide design services, but design became engineering services, engineering became manufacturing support services. You constantly reinvent yourself in making sure that you have distinctively different service offerings. What do we have now as what we call it as Cyient 3.0 is that in our original frame of things, we had services. And we now have a strategy called the S3 strategy, by which we're moving from services to solutions to subsystems. We just don't do a project for a customer. We like to provide a solution to a customer, which means there is multidisciplinary activity that's involved. Or you get down to a level where you say, I design a subsystem for the customer. That's called the S3 stack. So you constantly differentiate yourself. But then once you move into a situation where you say that I can design a subsystem, we say we now have a right to play in manufacturing the subsystem and also provide the aftermarket support for them. Those of you who may not be familiar, an aircraft engine lasts for at least 25 years. They make more money in supporting the aftermarket space as opposed to selling the engine itself. So there's a lot of money in the aftermarket space in providing engineering support to them. So therefore, what you need to do is definitely move up the value chain and constantly be different from others. Not necessarily in service offering also. We look at our own company, we did a major exercise in terms of branding. Originally, when I founded this company in 1991, our company was known as Infotech Enterprises. And people used to ask me this question saying that, Mohan, what is this name, Infotech Enterprises? Does it reflect what you do? I used to say, what's there in the name? But we recognized over a period of time that we need to get a distinctly different identity. And that's where, about 18 months to 24 months back, we rebranded ourselves as Cyient, and we live our brand promise, which is designing tomorrow together. So the second lesson that I have is entrepreneurs must reinvent their companies from time to time to create new opportunities for growth and always make them distinctively different through strategic thinking to keep them ahead of their competitors. The third one I'd like to talk about today is the customer centricity. I don't think I find a good adjective to describe what it is, but the closest I can talk about is we are obsessed with our customers. We once find a customer, we don't let them go. We charm them, we delight them. How do you charm a customer? How do you delight a customer? So long as you can deliver to the promise that you made, the customer is constantly delighted. Delighted to give you more work, and that's how scaling happens. Therefore, there is this debate about who is first, customer versus employees. To us, it's a fairly simple answer. I think the customer is very critical for building your business. Around the customer, of course, we put a framework called the PPT framework. Easily rememberable. Why? PPT is the extension of PowerPoint presentations. The .PPT framework is what we call them. But our PPT stands for people, processes, tools, technology, and training. Our ability to recruit the right people, train them, reward them, retain them. We put the best of processes in place to the extent that you can name any certification, quality certification, whether it's an ISO 9000, 2001, or it's a CII, it's SEI, CMMI, level 5. You can, or any of these quality standards, we already have them with us. So we drove process excellence to delight the customer so that the customer is back with you all the time. And it's just not the people and processes, but you need to have the right technology and constantly train your people to make sure that they deliver. And at one point of time, when we had a major challenge in terms of number of available engineers in India, trained engineers, skilled engineers in these areas, 11% of our revenue was being spent on training our engineers. That's the amount of effort, amount of money that was spent in making sure that we have focus to ensure our engineers had the right skill. As a result of what has happened is a small story I'll tell you, is that we have a customer called Tomtom. Are you familiar with this name? It's a navigation device company headquartered out of Amsterdam. They're about $6 billion in terms of revenue, a couple of, they're $20 billion or so of market cap. This customer, the origins of Tomtom actually lied in Menlo Park, California. 4 youngsters, like most of you here, started this company called ETAC. They were forerunners in terms of digitizing maps. These were maps that were required for navigation. 5 years later, they didn't find enough money. They sold it off to Rupert Murdoch. And he bought the company thinking that there's more amount of advertising space in physical maps as opposed to actually using them for navigation as an application. And 5 years thereafter, it was bought by Teleatlas, which was the Dutch major. And 3 years thereafter, Teleatlas was bought by Tomtom for a fairly large sum of money. So you saw this transformation. This is from 1994, I believe, 1994, when we started off a relation, 1993, when we started this relationship with ETAC, the Menlo Park-based company, to now. We delighted the customer to transitioning through a number of ownership changes, an innumerable number of management changes. But what sticks to the customer is the value that you create for them. It's the value which sticks to the customer to ensure that there is a continuity irrespective of people changing. And this account now is a $25 million account for us. So to me, the third lesson I have is entrepreneurs should definitely build trust with the customers in creating a value for the customer's business, and in the process, build an organization for growth and sustenance. The first one is dream big. The second one was distinctively different identity you need to have. And the third one is the customer centricity. Let's move on to the fourth one. And the fourth one is all about innovation. And this word is so commonly used at this point of time. I had this good fortune of being with two heads of states in the last 2 weeks. The previous week, I was with the Chinese Prime Minister in Dalian at the World Economic Forum. And as recent as last evening, I was with David Cameron in London at a global investor meet. And all of them talk about one thing, and that is it's not innovation with any small community. It has to be innovation at a country level. They think it's the innovation which will drive the new generation of job creation. I think there are a fairly good number of examples of how job creation would happen too. But that is how companies will also sustain themselves. If you're looking at why I gave those two examples are, if countries are existing at this point of time, countries are focusing towards innovation, you could well imagine how imperative it is for companies to focus on innovation. And what we have seen at Cyient happening at this point of time, we innovated business processes as a part of our GIS. We had innovation in terms of our business models. From a situation which was time and material, we moved into fixed cost, then we became outcome-based, then it became risk-reward models. So you constantly innovate to see what's the best way of creating value for your customers and also value for the company as such. But in the third phase of it, we started innovating products too for customers. There's a brand new aircraft engine called the NGPF. It's called the new gear turbofan engine. Time magazine rated them as the 10 best innovations in the world in 2010 for the last decade. And what is it? It's a simple phenomenon. Some of you are aerospace engineers or mechanical engineers. The first time they're putting a gearbox inside an aircraft engine, basically to make sure that the propeller does not run at one speed, whether it is fan, compressor, turbine, and afterburners running at the same speed. Now you can run them at different speeds. And this particular engine, I believe, will provide 60% less amount of noise, 18% better fuel efficiency, and 12% less amount of carbon emission. And an aircraft engine like this, sitting back in India and our resources in the United States, have contributed to 25% of effort for this engine is from us, and 22% of innovation, which are all patents at this point of time. 22% of patents that lie on the new gear turbofan engine from Pratt & Whitney comes from Cyient. So therefore, companies have to constantly innovate for themselves and also for their customers. And that's how the world is going to be as we move forward. Entrepreneurs must encourage innovation in order to stay relevant for their markets and customers. And today what's happening is that it has to become part of your part of your DNA. I believe the story number 3 where I talked about customers, I think the DNA change, personally I feel delighted about it, is that I brought about a change in the DNA of a company to say how quality was important. In this fourth form, I think the DNA change that's happening in the company today is people have to become innovative. How do people become innovative? Is basically by making sure, question the status quo. Start taking risks. Be persistent. Work in teams. Be open about it. If you have these 5 characteristics, which I keep repeating like a parrot, it is now a culture of innovation which will come into organizations. Let me move on to my 5th story, or lesson that I learned, is all about money. It's all about funding and profitability. And let me first say that money is a commodity. Money can only help. It cannot make companies. You have to have a number of constituents which will make companies successful. So therefore, if you look at an entrepreneur, certainly money is an important part. But one advice I have is that certainly raise more money than you need, because you can never predict what are the risks that are there in business. There's so many unforeseeable things could happen. Your project gets delayed because of an unforeseeable reason somewhere else, and you should not get grounded. That's one I wanted to tell you about. The second one is that also raise money when you don't need money. Because when you really need money, people don't give you money. They all think you're desperate at that point of time. So even where I am at this point of time as an organization, I always think about raising money when I don't need it. Today, we still have $100 million of cash in the bank. We don't have a debt in the books of the company. We're a debt-free company, a cash surplus company. But we still all the time say for potential acquisitions, if you require money, this is the right time to raise, as opposed to now go and look for a potential opportunity for acquisition and spend the money on it. But the second point I'd like to make is companies need to be profitable. Don't take your eyes off profitability. Profitability is not a bad word anywhere in the world in business. Believe me, customers also like this word called profitability, because customers think if you're profitable, you certainly are stable. If you're stable, you are a partner with them. So therefore, in terms of funding and profitability, the two lessons I have is, one is raise money when you don't need it. The second one is definitely don't keep your eyes off, even momentarily, from profitability. My last lesson that I have is values, ethics, and teams. Values are fundamental to any organization's success. We keep calling in Infotech or in Cyient, we keep saying values first. We play on this acronym called FIRST, fairness, integrity, respect, and transparency. And these 5 attributes, when they are equitable to all the stakeholders, that's when the company becomes successful. Who are the stakeholders? It's the customers, it's the investor, it's the employee, and it's the society. Not many people recognize society. To us, society is also important. I can talk about it a little while later. But with these 4 constituents, on top of it is what I keep saying the company stands. There's a foundation of values. There are 4 pillars of strength, which are the 4 stakeholders. Be equitable to all the 4 to make sure you are successful and stable on top of it. Teams are very important because companies are not done by individuals. And teams become very, very critical, especially at the early stages. The best of the people will not come and join you. Only way that you can make them join you is that you can share your dream. You need to share your dream to make them convinced that you have the right business with them. And while we recruited people, the 3 things that we learned in life is, one is that certainly make no compromise in terms of capability of people. You just say, I can't get the right guy, I'm going to get a substandard guy into my company. Company becomes substandard thereafter. The second one is look for values. If you don't get the right people with the right values in an organization, organization is done for good in the longer term. And finally, I keep saying, especially for entrepreneurs at the early stage, you need to have a stable workforce with you. So the lesson I have is that ethics and values will always sustain an entrepreneur, especially in difficult times, and must therefore reflect the team that helps him or her build the organization. Finally, let me conclude by saying the entrepreneurship is all about being dissatisfied about the present. We did many things right. And we did a compelling value proposition. We had flawless execution. We created value for all our stakeholders. We had strong values, great teams. We seized every opportunity that came our way. But more importantly, we were also lucky. But don't for a minute think that entrepreneurs who are lucky only will become successful. I keep saying luck smiles on the hardworking people. So you need to put the effort, and then luck will come to you. The second point I'd like to make before I conclude is that you live in a world which is completely different from where I was. You live in a world where there are enormity in terms of opportunities. The digitalization of the world today creates tremendous amount of opportunity. You look at the disruption in terms of technologies, whether it's Internet of Things, 3D printing, or it's automation, it is artificial intelligence, you name them. Or even you look at the smack stack, social, mobility, analytics, all of these provide you tremendous amount of challenges, tremendous amount of disruption for businesses like us. But for young entrepreneurs like you, it provides an opportunity. For us, it's a challenge. For you, it's an opportunity. So there are lots of opportunities in technology space at this point of time. And finally, I keep saying this, that I am past. What I see in front of my eyes is my future. So long as I keep seeing those smiling faces and shining eyes, I think future is in safe hands. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a seat. One thing that didn't come up in your remarks, though, when you left industry and decided to start your own venture, was there a moment when you laid down to go to sleep and think, I'm crazy, I should stop this, or this isn't going to work? And how did you deal with that moment if it happened?
Fortunately for me, Frank, it didn't happen. There were no denying at all lots of low tides in my life. Lots of challenges. It's not, don't think that, entrepreneurship is all bed of roses. The day we all think in becoming entrepreneurs, tomorrow onwards, wow, everything goes as planned. There's money coming to the bank. There's so much of hard work that you do. And there are lots of things which are unpredictable at times. And those are the times when you don't say that, look, I should have been working somewhere as a professional. But you keep saying, well, tomorrow could be a better day. And I need to be, if you have a challenge, how do you go and fix that particular challenge? Fix the challenge and fix the process also to make sure it doesn't happen again. A good example, maybe relevant in times that we live, there was a bombing incident in Glaxo Airport by terrorists. The two of them, Kafil Ahmed and Shafil Ahmed. One of them used to work for us. And so we were there on all newspapers. This was 1997. 2000, I don't get the date. It's somewhere around 2002, I believe, 2002 or 2003. And we were all over the newspapers. And what was it about? Design engineers are there. And we thought that was the end of our company, because our customer names were there in newspapers. Wall Street Journal carried an article about this. But then our belief was, no, we didn't do anything wrong. If at all, if we need to do, we go and check back the processes. Are we got the processes of employing people? Are we doing the background checks? Can this come up in the background check? Can we refine the background checks? So there are low points in life, but never did I ever feel that we go back to the job. I strongly recommend to all of you, don't think about it. Once you get into this mode of entrepreneurship, you have to be persistent. You need to be paranoid to be successful. Don't even momentally think, could I do something else? No. If everything is lost, only then you can think about going back to what you did. Because entrepreneurship as an experience is also not a bad thing. We keep saying failed entrepreneurs, we recruit them in our company because they know a lot about business than actually who became successful. So try out the idea is what I would say, Frank.
So I have a follow-on, and then I'm going to turn it over to John. So if you had it to do over again, would you have not joined industry first and immediately gone off and started your own venture? And is your advice to these individuals that they should spend time in industry, or if they have a disruptive idea, they should pursue it immediately?
You have the answer, Frank. I think if you have a disruptive, the times have changed considerably. I mentioned about it in my talk too. When people like me wanted to start industry, maybe I forgot, you could have probably figured out how old I am. I turned an entrepreneur when I turned 40 years. I'm 64 years old. I have a birthday coming up in a month when I turn 65, I believe.
You use an amazing skin cream because you look so ever youthful.
No, thank you. I'm not very sure about it. God has been kind to me. That's how I say. So, but the fact is that in the days and times I lived, experience was very important. That's how life was to all of us. Now, what Mark Zuckerberg taught all of you, taught all of us, including me, experience is not important. It's the idea which is important. The time is so at this point of time. The timing is so important that you can definitely, if you have an idea, move along with it. Not just, I'm talking about Facebook as the example. There's so many of them tech companies at this point of time, which are flourishing around the world, not just in the United States. They're all falling in place in every part of the world, whether it's China, India. We've seen, or for that matter, even in Europe. In London yesterday, I was talking to a group of people. So therefore, now I think experience does not have so much relevance.
John?
Sure. So one of the things that I think is most relevant for people in the audience is the fact that you are a Michigan alum. And it's awesome and amazing to have you back at your alma mater. But you've also done a lot of work in India with the IIT system as well. And I'm curious what lessons you've taken from your time here at Michigan that you've applied over there, and what lessons you would take from there that you would apply here in terms of teaching students entrepreneurship.
Well, thank you, John. In terms of lessons that I learned from here are the lessons which are a part of my life right now. I mean, I learned, especially I have tremendous amount of memories of that class I took, Policy Control 617 is what I keep saying. Small business management, case study that was happening. I think you mentioned about cases too, Frank, when I think the back room. So, you know, some of these things like, you know, having the dream, having a distinctly different one. But these are not just the ideas that you have. You have to hone them, execute them as we move forward. What we have seen in terms of teaching entrepreneurship in the classes too is that interactive sessions are a lot more beneficial to budding entrepreneurs as opposed to monologuing in the class. So therefore, as what Frank has done in terms of bringing somebody like me, I teach entrepreneurship. Actually, I teach only 1 credit, 14 contact hours course on leadership at IIT. IIT is the premium engineering schools in India, and I'm the chairman of the board of one of them. So just as fun, I go and teach a class on leadership. Even there, I bring a leader to every class of mine. He talks for an hour, and then we discuss that him for an hour in his absence thereafter.
How are your teacher scores?
I think they're reasonably good, and I keep kidding with people, are they real or not real, because I'm also the chairman.
Because they're handing their resume to you as they go out saying, thank you, Professor. Do we have questions in the audience before we wrap today? We have somebody out there with a mic. Does anybody have a question for our speaker?
The first question is always a difficult one, but...
John's got a question again. John's got another question for you.
I'll do a quick one. Make sure you guys think. We'll definitely go to the audience for at least one before we're done today. But I have a question. So in one of your slides, you mentioned that one of your biggest piece of advice in terms of finance was take more funding even when you don't need it, and take funding early on. And I think this is a really interesting point because it's rather controversial, I think, in today's society. There's been a lot of news, even parodied news out of Silicon Valley and places similar, about how taking too much money early on can lead to benchmarks that you can't meet and can put your company in a jeopardized position. So I'm curious if there's a way to strike that balance and what you think the best way to do that is.
John, you have a very valid point. No dispute at all. You can argue the case both ways. In the business that I was in, where I was seeing scale coming up, and I didn't want to get grounded, I raised money much ahead of time. But I think I always also felt that raising money ahead of time would be a good idea, as opposed to you get into a crisis mode, you don't get the right valuations, you don't know at that point of time you're running after money or you're trying to go back and build your business. So in that particular situation, you could get into poor decisions. As opposed to that, you plan ahead of time, you take good money, and then you also can be very picky and choosy about where you take the money from. Wherever we picked up money, we actually made sure that was good money, because just not money, they also added value to our business. So therefore, I think I still believe that, plan ahead, don't get into a situation where you're desperate for money. That's when you could make poor decisions.
Thank you. One question from the audience.
Yes.
Yes, sir, you're
Several
first
hands have gone up. Yes. See, one thing that we do, probably paucity of time I didn't mention, we believe very strongly in terms of what we call as measure to manage. My belief in life is anything that can be measured has to be measured. Once it is measured, it has to be compared. And once it's compared, if there's a deviation, you do a relentless root cause analysis. It's called RRCA, to find the reason for the deviation. And then you have to find strategies to go and fix it. By the time you fix it, you go back and then again start comparing yourself. So we do the same thing for both customers as well as employees. And we are, I believe, one of the very few companies in the world, including in India, we're just about the first one, where we also go back and do our investor satisfaction. Because to us, they're also equally important. So every stakeholder, whether it's the customer, employee, or the investor, we constantly gauge their satisfaction level and make sure we work through all three of them.
So when you aren't palling around with heads of state, what do you do for fun?
Go back, prepare for a class like this.
Very good. And one last question. Is there a competitor that you have your eye on that you worry could potentially disrupt you, given the size and scale of your company? You're not an edgy little startup anymore. You're a billion-dollar entity, a global entity. Do you have your eye on somebody that you worry about?
I think there is competition all around you. We don't disrupt that competition or dispute that competition. One thing that we are trying to say is, as I retire from my business, that question was always there in front of us to say, what do we do next step? And that's something very important for us. Is that I knew for sure as individuals, all of us will disappear some point of time. But you build corporations which have to live forever. Companies are immortal. Individuals are not immortal. So what we decided to do is there should be a proper succession in place. So we worked on a succession plan to start with. As a part of succession, there's a new strategic thinking that's evolving in the company. The right to play part is a new strategy, which now puts us away from any competitor. We not only design, but we also build, we can also support them. So they went ahead, bought a manufacturing company, they bought an aftermarket company in Singapore. Now we are a completely different entity. So therefore, you have to, if you want to be in the business, you need to be different from others. There's competition around you who does only engineering. We have potentially, the other challenge that we have is some of our customers could see us as a threat. That's how we're growing. But that we need to be very careful about. But the fact is that you need to constantly be different from others. From that perspective, even competition may not think that you're the right fit for them.
Very good. Well, let's thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody.
Thank you very much.
The more we open up that digital infrastructure, the more likely entrepreneurs and innovators can incorporate open data with their clever internal proprietary approaches to find ways to fix health, energy, and education.